If we look at the virtue here of serenity, serenity is the absence of those preconceptions. It's a sense of receptivity to whatever's going on within ourselves, outside of ourselves, and an openness to a non-judgmental attitude to whatever's arising, which, especially for ones, is a tremendous relief from a lot of inner aggravation and upset. So really the passion here of anger is, for ones, it's experienced as rage and as upset and frustration. And the understanding of the passion tells us that that's rooted in our ideas about what should and shouldn't be going on.
Right, and they're the voices in our head that kind of, as you hinted, have been almost put there by somebody else in one way. It's kind of what we've learnt along the way, and it isn't necessarily our own voice.
Right, yeah. They weren't exactly put there by somebody else, but
we've allowed
that's
them
kind
to
of
come there.
That's kind of a six-ish take on it.
My simplistic
I'm sorry, Ian.
language from my Enneagram type. Yeah. We get to the other six a bit later.
Okay, all right.
So, where do we go from number one?
Okay, we'll go to point 2. The passion here is pride,
Yeah.
and the virtue is humility. Pride here represents having an inner picture of how we're supposed to be. And if we look as we go around the circle of the Enneagram, we can see that each point builds on the next, really. So we have an ego ideal, as it's called psychologically, an inner picture of how we ought to be. And the pride is telling us whether we're corresponding to it or we're not corresponding to it. So it's an inner voice that's telling us, oh, that was really great. That was really good. You did that extremely well. I feel really good about myself now. Or, God, you are the worst possible human being on the planet.
It's quite extreme, isn't it? One to the other.
Yeah. But as I see it, both of them are part of the pride system, because there's a self-evaluation, and it's primarily about the self here, the pride, in terms of whether one is special or more wonderful than other people or way worse. So in both cases, it's an exaggerated self-importance and an exaggeration of importance on how one is seen by other people and how one is responded to, and so on. Twos are very, very concerned about whether they're accepted and loved by others. So the virtue here is humility, which means, according to Ichazu's definition again, knowing one's limits. And to me, it's always been, as a 2, that's always been an extremely useful definition, because 2s get into overextending and pridefully overextending. Oh, I can do this for you, or I can do that, or, time is no obstacle, that sort of thing, And so a kind of inner override of any sense of limitation. So humility here is a realistic self-assessment. It's not false humbleness, which is a way that term is often used, but rather it's a sense of kind of bowing to one's true reality.
So it's not trying to be Superman or Superwoman, it's just saying, I am a human being with finite resources and time.
Right. And this is where I am, and this is what's happening to me, and I don't need to inflate myself or feel deflated because of where I am.
Right.
So it's an accurate and an open assessment of where one is, or actually it's no assessment, but it's a recognition of where one is without judgment.
Yeah, it's just what's coming up for me now. It's interesting. When I was reading the preface of your book last night, there was a thing about, you mentioned brutal honesty. Mm-hmm. And it just seemed that honesty thing, if we're honest with ourselves, we actually discover not only our Enneagram type probably, but also it's so much easier to discover what our passion is and the possible way forward to our virtue.
Yes. Yes. Right.
If we're not honest with ourselves, then there isn't much of a starting point, is
That's
there?
right. That's right. Yeah. Yeah, and I think that's the real beauty of the Enneagram, is that it lays out some very difficult material for each of us to confront about ourselves. And there it is. And if we know that we're a particular type, it's pretty clear.
And even though it's embarrassing and we want to
Right.
deny it, I'm not like this,
Right.
there the facts are, and we can either take it on board and consider we can do something about it, or we can try and push it under the carpet again.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah.
So let's move around.
Okay.
So do we go to 3 next?
Yes, we go to 3. Okay. So the passion here is deceit or lying, and the virtue is veracity, telling the truth. Truthfulness. Also something real is another definition of veracity. So here what's being pointed to is a form of suffering in which we delude ourselves or deceive ourselves about what's really so, what's really true for us, who we truly are. It's connected to point 9, and actually it leads to point 9 if we follow the lines of flow around the Enneagram, but that's a whole other story. Maybe we'll get into that another time. But here at point 3 is the tendency that human beings have to not face what's so. So it's interesting that you brought up about being brutally honest. This is where, especially here at point 3, this is where that need for honesty, brutal honesty with ourselves, is seen as a virtue. 3s as a character type typically deceive themselves about who they are and about what's important to them, because they've taken on from others, from their culture, their family, a sense of who they're supposed to be, what the image is that they're supposed to correspond to. And so they end up kind of shape-shifting, changing themselves, becoming different, altering what's so for them in order to fulfill that image. And each of us, of course, does that to greater or lesser extents. And the virtue here of veracity tells us that in order to truly know ourselves and to become at peace with ourselves, we need to get real about what's really true about us, what really matters to us, what we care about, what we feel. It's not so much a matter of listening to oneself as it is at point 9, but it's a matter of really understanding that it's much more efficient for us to be truthful than it is to kind of lie our way through life.
Yeah, it's also a lot easier, isn't it, somehow?
It's a lot easier, yeah.
Yeah, because if you start lying, you've got to keep up the pretense, and
Right.
that requires tremendous energy.
Right. And on a deeper level, Ian, from a spiritual perspective, the passion here of lying is lying to ourselves about who we really are. In other words, deluding ourselves into believing that we are a personality. And that's a fundamental and basic lie that all human beings tell themselves, as long as they're identified with their personality as being who and what they are. In the retreat I just led last week, one of the participants, one of the group members, talked about the personality as the kind of froth on the surface of ourselves. And I thought that was a very beautiful description of the matter. So deceit here is believing that we're that froth instead of the real substance
Right. Yeah.
underlying that.